Miami, Florida, October 15, 1987. Marcus Rivera had worked undercover in Griselda Blanco's organization for 8 months. The woman who would pay an assassin $200,000 to kill her ex-lover called Marcus Mihijo, her son. She trusted him completely. That night, Elena Vasquez handed Marcus a manila envelope containing photographs, bank records, and locations of 3 safe houses. Everything the DEA needed to bring down the cocaine godmother. Marcus kissed Elena goodbye, believing she was risking her life to help him save Miami from the cartel's grip. 12 hours later, 3 federal agents lay dead in an ambush. The safe houses were empty. Griselda had vanished into the Colombian mountains, and Marcus Rivera's world collapsed when he realized the woman he loved had played him from the very beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The hook. The fluorescent lights in the DEA briefing room buzzed like dying insects as Marcus stared at the crime scene photographs spread across the metal table. Agent Sarah Chen's body lay twisted behind an overturned couch, her service weapon still holstered. She'd never had a chance to draw it. Agent Mike Torino had made it to the kitchen before the bullets found him, 3 in the back, execution style. Agent Luis Herrera had almost reached the rear exit when they cut him down in the doorway, his blood pooling on the threshold between life and death. Tell me again what happened, Rivera. Special Agent in charge Robert Morrison's voice carried the weight of 25 years in federal law enforcement and the particular exhaustion that came from burying good agents. Marcus kept his eyes on the photographs, unable to meet Morrison's gaze. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, cold now, like everything else in this sterile room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and failure. The intel was solid, Marcus said, his voice hoarse from hours of interrogation. Elena provided detailed floor plans, security rotations, everything. She said Griselda would be there for the money transfer at 0300 hours. The safe houses were supposed to be lightly guarded, 4, maybe 5 soldiers maximum. Instead, your team walked into a kill box. Morrison's words hit like physical blows. 47 cartel gunmen, military-grade weapons. They knew our exact entry points, our tactical approach, even our fallback positions. The photographs blurred as Marcus fought back the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Sarah had been 3 weeks from retirement. Mike was expecting his second child. Luis had just gotten engaged to his high school sweetheart. Elena wouldn't have what? Set up federal agents? Morrison slammed his hand on the table, making the photographs jump. Your girlfriend just orchestrated the biggest intelligence disaster in this office's history. 3 dead agents. Our entire Blanco operation blown. And you want to tell me she's innocent? Marcus finally looked up. Morrison's weathered face showed every year he'd spent chasing drug dealers through Miami's blood-soaked streets. Behind him, through the conference room's glass partition, Marcus could see other agents whispering, pointing, judging. He was no longer one of them. He was the agent who'd let his dick do his thinking and gotten good people killed. She was terrified of Griselda, Marcus insisted, even as doubt gnawed at his certainty. Elena risked everything to get us that intelligence. She's probably dead right now because of what she gave us. Morrison opened a thick manila folder and withdrew a series of surveillance photographs. Elena Vasquez stepping out of a black Mercedes in Bogota. Elena embracing a man Marcus recognized as one of Griselda's top lieutenants. Elena laughing at what appeared to be a celebration dinner, champagne glasses raised in a toast. These were taken yesterday, Morrison said quietly. 12 hours after your so-called terrified informant supposedly risked her life to help us. She doesn't look very dead to me, Rivera. In fact, she looks like she's celebrating. The air left Marcus's lungs in a rush. The woman in the photographs was undeniably Elena. Same dark eyes, same smile that had made him forget every rule he'd learned about keeping professional distance from assets. But this, Elena looked different somehow. Confident, predatory. Like a different person entirely from the frightened woman who'd trembled in his arms and whispered secrets in Spanish. There's more. Morrison's voice was almost gentle now, recognizing the devastation on Marcus's face. Bank records show Elena received a $2 million wire transfer from one of Griselda's accounts 6 hours before the raid. We also found evidence that she's been feeding Griselda information about our investigations for at least a year. Every operation you reported back to us, every lead you developed, she knew about all of it. Marcus stared at the photographs until they swam together into an impressionist painting of betrayal. Every conversation with Elena replayed in his mind with horrible new clarity. Her questions about raid timings, her interest in which agents would be involved, her uncanny ability to provide just enough intelligence to seem valuable while never quite delivering anything that seriously damaged Griselda's organization. Until now, when she delivered something devastating, 3 federal agents' lives on a silver platter. "I loved her," Marcus whispered, the admission torn from somewhere deep in his chest. "I know," Morrison said. "That's exactly what she was counting on." The room fell silent except for the relentless buzzing of the fluorescent lights. Through the glass partition, Marcus watched Miami's skyline shimmer in the afternoon heat. Somewhere out there, Elena was probably planning her next move, her next mark, her next deception. And Griselda Blanco was free to continue flooding America's streets with cocaine and violence. Morrison stood and straightened his tie. "Clean out your desk, Rivera. Your badge and weapons stay here." Marcus nodded numbly. He'd known this was coming from the moment he'd seen those photographs. Marcus sat in his car in the DEA parking garage for 27 minutes after cleaning out his desk, staring at the cardboard box on his passenger seat. 15 years of service reduced to a few personal items: a coffee mug from his daughter Sophia's college, a framed photo of his late wife Carmen, and a commendation plaque that now felt like mockery. The concrete walls around him seemed to press closer with each breath, carrying the smell of motor oil and something darker, the scent of endings. The drive to his empty house in Coral Gables passed in a blur of familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign. Everything looked the same: the palm trees lining Miracle Mile, the Art Deco facades gleaming in the late afternoon sun, the joggers and dog walkers going about their ordinary lives. But Marcus felt like he was seeing it all through bulletproof glass, separated from a world he no longer belonged to. He pulled into his driveway and sat looking at the house Carmen had picked out 12 years ago. She'd loved the Spanish tile roof and the way morning light filtered through the oak tree in the front yard. Now the windows stared back at him like vacant eyes, and the oak tree cast shadows that seemed to reach across the lawn like grasping fingers. Inside, the silence was absolute. No Elena curled on his couch with a book, no scent of her perfume lingering in the air, no half-empty wine glasses on the coffee table from nights when she'd listened to him talk about cases, her dark eyes wide with what he'd thought was concern but now recognized as calculation. Marcus poured 3 fingers of bourbon and sank into his leather recliner, Carmen's final gift to him before the cancer took her. The alcohol burned, but it couldn't touch the cold knot in his chest where trust used to live. He'd been a fool twice now. First, he'd failed to save Carmen despite all his training, all his instincts, all his desperate attempts to control an uncontrollable disease. Then he'd let Elena slip past every defense he'd built, convinced himself that love could bloom in the middle of a war zone without consequences. The bourbon was working, loosening the tight coil of rage and self-loathing in his gut, when his phone buzzed. Sophia's name appeared on the screen, and Marcus felt his chest tighten. His daughter was a prosecutor in Orlando now, brilliant and driven like her mother had been. She still called him twice a week, still believed her father was one of the good guys fighting the good fight. "Hey, mija," Marcus answered, working to keep his voice steady. "Dad, I just saw the news. Something about a DEA operation gone wrong in Miami. Please tell me you weren't—" "I'm fine," he lied, watching shadows creep across his living room as the sun set. "Just another day at the office." Sophia's laugh carried so much of Carmen's warmth that Marcus had to close his eyes. "You're terrible at lying. You know that? Mom always said you had the worst poker face in law enforcement. Your mother was a smart woman, the smartest, which is why I'm calling to make sure you're taking care of yourself. You've been distant lately, Dad, distracted. Are you eating real meals? And please tell me you're not living on bourbon and regret again." Marcus looked at the glass in his hand and set it on the side table. Even dead, Carmen was still trying to save him through their daughter's voice. "I'm eating. I'm fine. Just tired." "Well, get some rest. And Dad, I love you." Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out. That's what families do. After Sophia hung up, Marcus sat in the gathering darkness, not bothering to turn on lights. The house felt enormous around him, filled with the ghosts of conversations with Elena. She'd sat in this very room and asked him about his work, his cases, his fears. She'd held him when nightmares about Carmen's final days jerked him awake. She'd made him believe that maybe, despite everything he'd lost, there was still something worth fighting for. Now he understood that every kiss had been intelligence gathering. Every whispered confession of love had been cover for operational questions. Every time she'd said she was afraid of Griselda, she'd been feeding him lines designed to make him protective, possessive, careless. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was the certainty that some part of it had felt real to him, and the terrifying possibility that some small part of it might have felt real to her, too. That made it worse somehow. The idea that she might have genuinely cared for him even as she orchestrated his destruction. Outside, a mockingbird began its evening song, cycling through the calls of a dozen other species with perfect, stolen precision. Marcus listened to the beautiful deception and wondered how long it would take before he could trust his own judgment again, before he could look at another person without seeing Elena's face, without hearing Morrison's words. That's exactly what she was counting on. The bourbon waited on the side table, amber and patient in the darkness. Inciting incident. Marcus reached for the bourbon, his fingers closing around the cool glass when the phone rang. Not his cell, the landline Carmen had insisted they keep, the one that barely anyone used anymore. The shrill sound cut through the darkness like a blade, making him freeze with the glass halfway to his lips. 3 rings. 4. He should let it go to the machine. Nothing good came from phone calls this late, especially not today. But something in the insistent tone made him set down the bourbon and cross to the kitchen, where the old rotary phone sat on the counter like a relic from a simpler time. Hello? Silence. Then, the soft whisper of breathing on the other end. Marcus. The voice was barely audible, spoken in Spanish-accented English that made his blood turn to ice water. Marcus, mi amor, are you there? The phone slipped in his suddenly sweating palm. Elena. After 15 years of silence, Elena Vasquez was calling him. His knees went weak, and he gripped the counter for support. You're supposed to be dead, he managed, his voice hoarse. A soft laugh, tinged with sadness. Dead to you, perhaps. Dead to the DEA. But very much alive, querido. Don't. The word came out sharper than he intended. Don't call me that. You lost the right to call me anything. I know you must hate me. Hate doesn't begin to cover it. Marcus turned to stare out the kitchen window into his backyard, where shadows moved between the orange trees. Real shadows or imagined ones. He was no longer sure he could trust his own eyes. 3 good agents died because of you, because of what you told Griselda, because I was stupid enough to believe your lies. It wasn't all lies. Elena's voice was different now, smaller, more vulnerable than he remembered. What happened between us? Dios mío, Marcus, that was real. More real than anything in my life before or since. Bullshit. But even as he said it, he felt the familiar pull of her voice, the same magnetic gravity that had drawn him in 15 years ago. You played me from the beginning. Morrison showed me the photographs, Elena. You celebrating while my friends' bodies were still warm. Those photographs, she exhaled slowly. Things are never what they appear to be in our world. You know this. Our world? We don't have a world. We never did. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window. Why are you calling me? What could you possibly want? I'm in trouble, Marcus. Real trouble. Griselda. She knows about us, about what we had. She's been hunting me for years, and now she's close, very close. Despite himself, Marcus felt a flicker of the old protective instinct. He crushed it ruthlessly. Not my problem anymore. Please, just listen. I have information. Stop! Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. Whatever game you're playing, I'm not interested. I'm not DEA anymore. I can't help you, and I wouldn't if I could. You're not DEA? Elena's surprise sounded genuine. Marcus, what happened? What did they do to you? The concern in her voice, real or manufactured, was like salt in an open wound. What do you think happened? You destroyed my career along with everything else. I've been running a private security firm for 15 years, trying to forget you existed. A long pause. When Elena spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I'm so sorry to perdona, Marcus. I never wanted... Don't. He squeezed his eyes shut. Just don't. Whatever you're sorry for, it's 15 years too late. Griselda has a contract out on me. $200,000. She's hired Tomas Herrera, Luis's brother. Do you remember Luis? The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Luis Herrera, the young agent who'd almost made it to the rear exit. The one who'd been engaged to his high school sweetheart. You don't get to say his name. Tomas blames me for Luis's death. He's been tracking me for months, getting closer when he finds me. Elena's breathing quickened. Marcus, I need help, protection. I can pay... From me? Marcus laughed bitterly. You want protection from the man whose life you destroyed? The man whose friends you had murdered? You're the only one I trust. Trust? The word exploded from him with such force that his voice echoed off the kitchen walls. You trust me? After what you did? Yes, Elena whispered. Because despite everything, despite all the lies and betrayals and blood between us, you loved me once. And I, Dios me ayude, I loved you too. Marcus hung up the phone so hard the bell inside chimed in protest. He stood in his dark kitchen, hands shaking, heart hammering against his ribs. Elena was alive. Elena was in trouble. Elena claimed she had loved him. The phone began ringing again immediately. This time, he didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. The phone rang 12 more times before falling silent. Marcus stood motionless in his kitchen, staring at the rotary dial as if it might suddenly transform into something less dangerous. His reflection in the window showed a man he barely recognized. Gray stubble, hollow eyes, the kind of haunted expression he'd seen on too many faces in too many interrogation rooms. When the silence stretched past the 5-minute mark, he allowed himself to breathe. Elena had given up. She'd moved on to whatever backup plans someone like her always had waiting. He was safe in his empty house with his bourbon and his ghosts. The landline rang again. This time he yanked the cord from the wall, the plastic connector clattering across the tile floor. But his hands were still shaking as he returned to the living room, and the bourbon tasted like ash when he finally lifted it to his lips. Sleep was impossible. Marcus paced through his house, checking locks, adjusting curtains, his old paranoid instincts awakening after years of dormancy. Every sound made him freeze. The ice maker cycling in the refrigerator, a branch scraping against the roof, the distant hum of late-night traffic on Coral Way. He found himself standing at windows, scanning the street for unfamiliar cars, movement in shadows, the glint of surveillance equipment. This was exactly what Elena wanted. Even 15 years later, she could reach across time and space to turn his life inside out with a single phone call. By dawn, Marcus had made his decision. He would go to the office early, lose himself in paperwork, pretend this was just another Thursday. Rivera Security Solutions might not be glamorous work, mostly corporate consulting and background checks for wealthy paranoids, but it was honest work, clean work. No cartels, no double agents, no beautiful women with secrets hidden behind dark eyes. The drive to Coconut Grove should have been routine. Marcus had made this trip every weekday for 15 years, knew every traffic light and turn. But today, his rearview mirror felt like enemy territory. Every motorcycle delivery rider looked like a potential assassin. Every car that stayed behind him for more than 3 blocks triggered a cold sweat between his shoulder blades. He was losing his mind. One phone call from a ghost, and he was jumping at shadows like a rookie agent on his first surveillance. The converted warehouse that housed Rivera Security sat on a quiet side street, surrounded by art galleries and overpriced coffee shops that catered to Miami's creative class. Marcus had chosen the location specifically for its anonymity, the kind of place where no one paid attention to anyone else's business. But as he pulled into his usual parking spot, something felt wrong. Mrs. Delgado from the gallery next door was standing on the sidewalk, clutching her purse with white-knuckled fingers. She usually arrived at noon, not 7 in the morning. When she saw Marcus, she hurried over, her face pale beneath carefully applied makeup. "Marcus, gracias, adios, you're here. There were men asking about you yesterday, after you left." The coffee he'd grabbed at a drive-thru turned bitter in his mouth. "What kind of men?" "The kind—" Mrs. Delgado glanced around nervously. "The kind my late husband used to warn me about. From the old country. Well-dressed but with eyes like sharks. They wanted to know about your schedule, your habits, when you arrive, when you leave." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "I told them nothing, but they scared me, mijo. They scared me very much." Marcus felt the familiar ice-cold clarity that came with confirmed threat assessment. "How many?" "2. Both young, both dangerous. One had a scar here." She traced a line across her left cheek. The other kept checking his phone like he was waiting for orders. Professional surveillance. Elena hadn't just called to reminisce about old times. She'd brought serious people into his world. People who asked questions and made legitimate business owners afraid to speak above a whisper. "Mrs. Delgado, I want you to close your gallery today. Visit your sister in Tampa, the one you're always talking about. Don't come back until I call you." Her eyes widened. "Marcus, what's happening? What kind of trouble?" "The kind that kills innocent bystanders." The words came out harsher than he intended, but they had the desired effect. Mrs. Delgado nodded quickly and hurried toward her car. Marcus stood on the sidewalk, keys in hand, staring at the entrance to his office. For 15 years, this place had been his sanctuary. Now it felt like a trap waiting to snap shut. But he couldn't run. Running would only confirm to whoever was watching that Elena had successfully gotten under his skin. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, hyper-aware of the soft chime that announced his arrival. The familiar smell of old wood and industrial carpet should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded him of how isolated he was here, how many windows overlooked the building, how many ways someone could get inside if they really wanted to. Marcus sat at his desk and tried to focus on quarterly tax reports, but his eyes kept drifting to the phone. It remained silent, but somehow that felt more ominous than if it had been ringing constantly. The quarterly reports might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. Marcus stared at the same column of numbers for the third time, his mind refusing to process anything beyond the certainty that Elena's people were out there, watching, waiting. The coffee in his mug had gone cold hours ago, but he kept lifting it to his lips anyway. A mindless ritual that gave his hands something to do besides shake. When the office phone finally rang at 10:30, the sound hit him like a gunshot. He let it go to voicemail, but the damage was done. His heart was racing, and sweat had broken out across his forehead despite the air conditioning running full blast. The second call came 20 minutes later, then a third. Each time Marcus forced himself to wait, to let the machine pick up. Each time no message was left. By noon, the silence had become unbearable. Marcus found himself checking the locks on both the front and back doors, testing the window latches, cataloging potential escape routes with the kind of tactical precision he hadn't needed since his DEA days. The weight of his .38 in its shoulder holster, a precaution he'd started taking again this morning, felt both comforting and terrifying. He was examining the sight lines from his office window when he saw the black Escalade parked across the street. Tinted windows, engine running, positioned for a clear view of his building's entrance. Professional surveillance, just like Mrs. Delgado had described. Marcus stepped back from the window, his mouth dry. This was escalating faster than he'd anticipated. Elena wasn't just reaching out for help, she was dragging him into something active, immediate, deadly. The landline in his office began ringing again. This time, something in the persistence made him answer. "Rivera Security." "You can't avoid me forever, Marcus." Elena's voice was steady now, stripped of the vulnerability from last night's call. "And you can't avoid the men watching your building. You brought them here." It wasn't a question. "No, querido. You did that all by yourself 15 years ago. I'm just the excuse they needed to finally collect on an old debt." Marcus sank into his chair, the implications hitting him like a freight train. "Griselda knows about our affair. She's always known. She just never cared enough to do anything about it while she had bigger problems to solve. But times change. The Miami-Dade police are getting closer to her operation. The DEA is building cases that might actually stick. And she needs scapegoats, loose ends, people who know too much about how she stayed ahead of law enforcement for so long. The coffee turned to acid in Marcus's stomach. You're saying I'm a target because of information you gave me. I'm saying you're a target because Griselda has finally decided that everyone connected to the Hernandez raids needs to disappear, permanently. Elena paused, and he could hear traffic noise in the background, the sound of a city in motion while his world collapsed. The 3 agents who died? That was just the beginning, Marcus. We were all marked for death that day. Some of us just took longer to process. Marcus gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. Process? Tomas Herrera isn't just hunting me for revenge. He's working down a list. Agent Morrison was found dead in his Aventura condo 3 days ago, staged to look like a heart attack, but the medical examiner found traces of succinylcholine in his bloodstream. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Morrison, gruff, paranoid Morrison, who'd shown him those photographs of Elena, who tried to warn him that love was a luxury DEA agents couldn't afford, dead because of choices made 15 years ago, because of a case that should have been buried and forgotten. You're lying. But even as he said it, Marcus was pulling up news websites on his computer, searching for Morrison's name. Check for yourself. The obituary ran yesterday in the Herald. Services are private, family only. But we both know Bill Morrison didn't have any family left. Marcus found the obituary buried in the local news section. A brief paragraph noting the death of a retired federal agent, survived by no immediate family, remembered for his dedication to law enforcement. The kind of sanitized summary that revealed nothing about the man who'd spent 30 years fighting cartels, who'd seen too much and trusted too little, who'd died alone in a condo overlooking Biscayne Bay. Who else is on the list? Marcus's voice came out as a whisper. Everyone who knew about my connection to Griselda. Everyone who might be able to testify about how information flowed between the DEA and the cartel during those years. You, me, 2 other agents who've already disappeared. Elena's breath was shaky now, the professional composure cracking. Marcus, we're the last ones left. Through his office window, the Escalade's engine continued running, patient as death itself. Marcus stared at the computer screen, Morrison's obituary blurring through the haze of 15 years of buried guilt. The man who'd tried to save him from Elena's web, reduced to 3 lines of sanitized text. But something wasn't adding up, the timeline, the pattern Elena was describing. Wait. Marcus's finger traced back through the browser history, checking dates. Morrison died 3 days ago, but you called me last night saying Griselda just found out about us. If she's been hunting people from the Hernandez raids for years, why are you just now? Because I wasn't running from her before. Elena's voice cut through his question like a blade. I was working for her. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, a tectonic plate of understanding grinding against 15 years of assumptions. What did you say? The raids, Marcus. The 3 agents who died. Morrison's heart attack. All of it. I've been coordinating with Griselda's people to clean up the loose ends from our relationship. Elena's voice had changed completely now, stripped of fear and vulnerability, revealing something colder underneath. Did you really think I called you last night because I needed your protection? Marcus's hand moved instinctively toward his shoulder holster, but his muscles felt disconnected from his brain. You're lying. Am I? Think about it, mi amor. Think about how perfectly everything has fallen into place. Morrison dies of an apparent heart attack just days before I contact you. Your nosy neighbor gets scared off by men asking questions. You're isolated in your office with a clear view of the street, making it easy for Tomas to confirm you're inside. Elena's laugh was soft, almost fond. You always were too trusting for this business. The Escalade across the street wasn't surveillance. It was a killing ground, positioned for an easy exit after the job was done. And Marcus had walked right into it, drawn by the same magnetic pull that had destroyed his career 15 years ago. The photograph Morrison showed me, Marcus said slowly, his tactical mind finally breaking through the emotional fog. You celebrating while my friends were dead. He said it was taken the night of the raids. It was taken 3 weeks later, at a planning meeting for the next phase of operations. We were celebrating how smoothly the elimination of compromised assets had gone. Elena's voice carried a note of professional pride that made Marcus's blood turn to ice. Griselda was very pleased with how I'd handled the Marcus problem. The Marcus problem. He repeated the words like they belonged to someone else's life. You were getting too close to the truth about my real role in the organization. Too close to information that could have brought down the entire Miami operation. The affair was perfect cover. Make it look like a tragic case of an agent losing objectivity. Discredit any intelligence you might have gathered. Elena paused, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Though, I must admit, your emotional investment made the manipulation much easier than anticipated. Every conversation they'd had, every stolen moment, every whispered confession of love, all of it carefully orchestrated theater. Marcus thought about the way she'd responded to his touch, the tears in her eyes when she'd told him about her childhood, the way she'd made him feel like he was saving her from a world she claimed to hate. Morrison tried to warn me, Marcus whispered. He showed me evidence, but I wouldn't listen. Poor Bill. He was always too smart for his own good. Started asking questions about how certain raids kept going wrong, why key witnesses kept disappearing. When he approached you with those photographs, we knew he was getting close to connecting the dots. Elena's tone was almost regretful. If it helps, the succinylcholine was quick. He wouldn't have suffered. Through the window, Marcus saw movement in the escalade. A door opening, a figure emerging, tall, lean, with something metallic glinting in his right hand. Tomas is very good at his work, Elena continued conversationally. He's been planning your death for weeks, studying your routines, waiting for the perfect moment. This phone call? It's his signal that you're confirmed inside and distracted. Marcus yanked open his desk drawer, reaching for the backup piece he kept there. Why tell me this? Why not just let him do it? Because I want you to understand, Marcus. I want you to know that every moment between us, every time you thought you were saving me, you were really just... Elena's voice caught, and for a split second, he heard something that might have been genuine emotion. You were just digging your own grave. The front door chime sounded softly in the distance. Goodbye, mi amor, Elena whispered. Thank you for loving me enough to die for me. The line went dead, but Marcus kept the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone like it might offer salvation. His backup felt impossibly heavy as he drew it from the desk drawer, the familiar weight doing nothing to steady his hands. 15 years of security consulting, of careful routines and controlled environments, had made him soft. But muscle memory was harder to kill than hope. The front door chimed again. 2 soft notes that announced someone entering Rivera Security Solutions like they owned the place. Footsteps crossed the outer office, measured and patient, moving with the confidence of a man who'd done this before. Marcus thought about the back exit, the narrow alley that led to the street behind the building, but Elena would have planned for that too. She'd had weeks to orchestrate this moment. Senor Rivera? The voice carried a slight accent, cultured and polite. My name is Tomas Herrera. I believe someone has been expecting me. Marcus pressed his back against the office wall, positioning himself beside the doorframe. The 38 feet's grip was slick with sweat, but his breathing had steadied, the old training finally kicking in over the emotional chaos. He'd faced cartel enforcers before, in the days when his badge meant something and his conscience was clean. Elena tells me you were very close, Tomas continued, his footsteps stopping just outside Marcus's office. She speaks of you with great affection. It's rare to find such devotion in our line of work. Through the crack beneath the door, Marcus could see the shadow of 2 feet. Professional stance, balanced on the balls of his feet, ready to move in any direction. This wasn't some street thug with a grudge. This was what Elena had called him, an artist. She also tells me you were a good agent once, before love made you careless. The doorknob turned slowly, quietly. I respect that. A man should be willing to die for what he believes in. The door swung open, and Marcus saw him clearly for the first time. Mid-30s, expensive suit, the kind of face that could disappear in a crowd or charm its way into any building. The gun in his hand was a suppressed Walther P99, held with casual competence. But something in his eyes gave Marcus pause. Not the dead stare of a psychopath, but something almost regretful. "You're not what I expected," Marcus said, keeping his own weapon trained on Tomas's center mass. "Nor you." Tomas stepped into the office but made no move to raise his gun. Elena described a man destroyed by grief and guilt. Instead, I find someone who still remembers how to fight. Morrison fought too. How did that work out for him? Agent Morrison was a different situation. He was actively investigating, asking questions that threatened the organization. His death was necessary. Tomas moved carefully to the window, glancing out at the escalade below. "But you, Senor Rivera, you've been running a legitimate business, bothering no one. Until yesterday, you were content to let sleeping ghosts lie." Marcus kept his weapon trained on the assassin, but something in the man's demeanor was all wrong. Professional killers didn't engage in philosophical discussions with their targets. They didn't look conflicted about following orders. "Then why are you here?" "Because Elena Vasquez paid me $200,000 to kill you." Tomas turned from the window, studying Marcus with new interest. "But she neglected to mention that you saved my sister's life in 2003. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. 2003, the Riverside Elementary raid, when Griselda's people had used a school as a meeting point. A janitor's daughter caught in the crossfire, bleeding out in a classroom while federal agents cleared the building. Marcus had carried her to the ambulance, stayed with her until the paramedics got in force started. "Carmen Herrera," Marcus whispered. 8 years old, gunshot wound to the abdomen. 9 years old. And yes, Tomas lowered his weapon slightly. "She's a teacher now, married, 2 children of her own. She still talks about the policeman who held her hand and told her stories while she was bleeding." The absurdity of the situation hit Marcus all at once, standing in his office with a loaded gun trained on the brother of a child he'd saved, while the woman he'd loved orchestrated his death from somewhere across the city. Elena's planning had been flawless except for this one detail. This thread connecting past and present in a way she couldn't have anticipated. "Elena doesn't know about the connection," Marcus said. "Elena knows only that I'm the best at what I do. She doesn't concern herself with my family history." Tomas holstered his weapon in a fluid motion. "Which presents us both with an interesting problem." Outside, the Escalade's engine continued running, waiting for a job that wouldn't be completed as planned. Marcus lowered his own gun, though he didn't put it away entirely. Trust was a luxury neither of them could afford, but the immediate threat had shifted into something more complex. "What do you propose we do about it?" Tomas moved to the window again, studying the street below with the practiced eye of a predator evaluating his hunting ground. "Elena will expect confirmation within the hour. When she doesn't receive it, she'll assume something went wrong and activate contingency plans." He turned back to Marcus, his expression grim. "She's not the type of woman who leaves loose ends." Marcus kept his distance, the .38 still ready but no longer aimed directly at the assassin. "You're suggesting we work together." "I'm suggesting we both have reasons to want Elena Vasquez to answer for what she's done." Tomas pulled out his phone, showing Marcus a series of photographs. Crime scenes, bodies, Morrison's condo, looking peaceful except for the medical examiner's tags. She's been cleaning house for months, eliminating anyone who could connect her to Griselda's operation, but she made one critical error, which is, she assumed loyalty could be bought. Tomas pocketed the phone. "Griselda Blanco doesn't know Elena hired me independently. As far as the organization is concerned, you should have died weeks ago, along with Morrison and the others. Elena has been freelancing, using cartel resources for her own agenda." The implications crystallized in Marcus's mind with perfect, terrible clarity. She's not just cleaning up loose ends, she's positioning herself to take over Griselda's operation. Every person on that list represents a potential threat to her ascension. Morrison knew too much about intelligence leaks. The other agents could testify about her real role during the Hernandez raids. Tomas's smile was cold and professional. "And you, Senor Rivera, you're the only person alive who can prove she orchestrated the deaths of federal agents while posing as an informant." Marcus thought about the woman who'd whispered promises in his ear 15 years ago, who'd made him believe he was saving her from a life she claimed to hate. Every confession of love had been reconnaissance, every moment of vulnerability had been carefully calculated theater. But underneath Elena's performance had been something else, ambition that burned cold and patient as winter starlight. "She's been planning this since 2008, Marcus said quietly. "The affair, the blown operation, my career destruction, all of it was set up for a play she's making now. Elena Vasquez thinks 15 moves ahead, but she made one assumption that will destroy her." Tomas checked his watch. "She believes you're dead, which means she doesn't know you're aware of her real agenda. For the next few hours, you're a ghost, officially eliminated but actually free to act." Through the office window, Marcus could see the Escalade's driver growing restless, checking mirrors, preparing for an extraction that wouldn't come. The afternoon sun slanted across his desk, illuminating the space where he'd built a new life after the DEA destroyed his old one. 15 years of running security for art dealers and worried executives, of keeping his head down and his conscience buried. Morrison had died because he'd tried to seek justice. The other agents had died because they'd known too much. Marcus holstered his weapon. "What do you need from me?" "Elena is meeting with Griselda tonight, a restaurant called Mariscos del Caribe in Little Havana, neutral ground where they conduct monthly business reviews." Tomas pulled a small recording device from his jacket. "She'll be reporting your death, along with Morrison's and the others. What she won't mention is that she ordered these killings without authorization. You want me to record her confession. I want you to walk into that restaurant alive and watch Elena explain to Griselda why she's been lying for months about eliminating threats to the organization." Tomas's expression was carved from stone. "In our business, unauthorized executions are considered acts of war." The elegant simplicity of it struck Marcus like revelation. Elena had been so focused on eliminating witnesses to her past crimes that she'd created evidence of new ones. Her greatest strength, the ability to manipulate events from the shadows, would become her weakness the moment those shadows were stripped away. "Griselda will kill her," Marcus said. "Griselda will kill her slowly, after extracting every detail of Elena's plans for the organization, which means everyone she's murdered, everyone she's manipulated, will finally receive justice." Tomas moved toward the door, then paused. "My sister Carmen still has nightmares about that day in 2003. But she also remembers the police officer who promised her everything would be all right." Marcus looked out at the Escalade, at the city beyond, at the life he'd built on the foundation of Elena's lies. "Will everything be all right?" "Tonight, Señor Rivera, we're going to find out." Tomas smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "Elena Vasquez taught us both that love can be weaponized, but she never learned that honor can be too." The assassin disappeared into the hallway, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of 15 years and the promise of an ending Elena would never see coming. Marcus stood at his office window for a long time after Tomas left, watching the Escalade finally pull away from the curb. The driver would report mission failure, and somewhere across the city, Elena would begin calculating her next move. But for the first time in 15 years, Marcus Rivera was no longer 3 steps behind. The recording device felt insignificant in his palm, a piece of technology smaller than a matchbox that would either deliver justice or get him killed. He thought about Morrison, about the fear in the old agent's eyes when he tried to warn Marcus about Elena's true nature. Bill had died believing his former partner was too compromised by love to see the truth. He'd been right, but not in the way that mattered. Marcus had loved Elena Vasquez completely, genuinely, with the kind of devotion that reshapes a man's soul. That love had been real even if everything else was performance. The tragedy wasn't that he'd been fooled, it was that he'd been willing to be fooled, because the alternative meant accepting that he'd failed the 3 agents who died trusting his intelligence. Mariscos del Caribe occupied a corner building in Little Havana that had survived 3 decades of gentrification through the simple expedient of serving the best stone crab in Miami. Marcus arrived early, taking a table near the kitchen where he could observe the main dining room without being easily seen. The restaurant's owner, a weathered Cuban exile named Raul, had been feeding federal agents and cartel operators with equal hospitality since the 1990s. Neutral ground, as Tomas had called it. Elena entered at exactly 8 o'clock, and Marcus felt his breath catch despite everything he now knew about her. She wore a simple black dress that managed to be both elegant and understated, her dark hair pulled back to reveal the graceful line of her neck. For a moment she was the woman who'd whispered his name in hotel rooms, who'd made him believe he was saving her from a world she claimed to hate. Then Griselda Blanco's people arrived, and Elena's mask slipped into place with seamless precision. Marcus had never seen the infamous drug lord in person, but her reputation filled the room like smoke. Griselda moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd survived decades in a business where trust was fatal and paranoia was practical wisdom. Her security detail positioned themselves throughout the restaurant with professional efficiency, while she took her customary corner booth. Elena approached the table with the confidence of a trusted lieutenant reporting on routine business. Marcus activated the recording device and leaned forward, straining to catch their conversation over the ambient noise of clinking plates and quiet conversations. "The Miami situation has been resolved," Elena said, sliding into the booth across from Griselda. "Morrison and the other loose ends from the 2008 operations have been handled." "Including the DEA agent?" Griselda's voice carried the slight rasp of someone who'd smoked Cuban cigars for 40 years. "Marcus Rivera died this afternoon. Professional work. It will appear to be a robbery gone wrong." Marcus watched Elena lie with the same casual grace she'd once used to tell him she loved him. Her hands were steady as she sipped her wine, her expression appropriately solemn for discussing necessary violence. She was performing for Griselda the same way she'd once performed for him, but now Marcus could see the calculation behind every gesture. "These were not authorized eliminations," Griselda said quietly. The words fell into their conversation like stones into still water. Elena's wine glass paused halfway to her lips, and for the first time, Marcus saw genuine surprise flicker across her features. "The organization's security required—" "The organization's security is my responsibility, Mia, not yours." Griselda leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Did you think I wouldn't notice when my weapons disappear? When Tomas stops reporting his movements? When bodies pile up in Miami without my knowledge?" Elena set down her wine glass with infinite care. "I was protecting our interests." "You were protecting your interests, building your own network, eliminating threats to your personal agenda." Griselda signaled to her security team with a subtle gesture. "Tell me, Elena, where exactly did you think this path would lead?" Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched 15 years of lies finally collapse under their own weight. Elena had orchestrated everything, the affair, the blown operations, the deaths of federal agents, as part of a plan to position herself for this moment. But her greatest strength had become her weakness. She'd manipulated events from the shadows for so long that she'd forgotten how to operate in the light. "Griselda," Elena began, but the older woman raised a hand for silence. "Agent Rivera sends his regards," Griselda said softly. Elena's face went white. Across the dining room, one of Griselda's men stepped aside, and Marcus Rivera walked into the light, very much alive and carrying the weight of 15 years' worth of ghosts. Their eyes met across the restaurant, and Elena's mask finally completely fell away.